The Fletch cast. It's genetics.
Club members, welcome. I've been thinking about you guys this week a lot, especially this week. I do have some disappointing news. Well, actually, we have really good news. We have 956 subscribers, roughly, which means we're almost at 1,000. I have some less good news, and that is apparently our presidential pardon connect might be leaving us soon. So if you want to get a presidential pardon, you should do it quickly is where I'm going with this. So do that quickly. This is I was telling interracial brother Mark that this is a great time for the Fletchcast. I did this because I wanted to talk about race and how it interacts with society and what our role is in that process. And this week we've seen, in my opinion, what can happen when people allow race to be a divisive device as opposed to a collective device. And it made me think about lots of stuff. But one thing that really kind of brought to my attention was in science, there's this attempt to generate a theory of everything. I mean, scientists believe that they can predict, they can construct a theory like E equals MC squared, but they can come up with an E equals MC squared for everything, meaning that this will apply across the board for everything. And whether they can do that or not, I don't know. Maybe they can, but it's started me thinking in conjunction with what happened in Washington this week. And there is kind of a theory of everything. It's the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution, whether it is biological, whether it is technology, whether it's architecture, stands for the premise that if you do not evolve, if your thought process, if your existence does not evolve, then you die. And it's across the board. Evolve or die, evolve or die. And what that says to me is equally as applicable for society. Societies are where people live. Societies are part of a biological, technological, architectural connection, and societies also must evolve or die. It's just that simple. If you evolve, you continue to live and to prosper and to grow. If you die, you're dead. I know that's complex, but that's what it is. And one of the things that is clearest to me, particularly in the context of race, is that those societies in this world, and our roughly, let's just say humans have been here for 11,500 years, roughly, if you're going by certain math. And that is this. Those societies that narrowly define themselves, those societies that seek to eject or exclude other people, they have all died, every single one. And that's a good thing. Whether it's the Nazis, whether it's the Romans, the Macedonians, they've all died. As we talked about in one of our first episodes, Cat just died. He was Macedonian. In our first episode, we talked about that Genghis Khan had the longest, broadest based empire because it was multicultural. And what we know for certainty, if you do not evolve, you die as a society. We are now confronted with a situation, and we touched on it a little bit last week. It's this idea that we as a society are evolving, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for certain parts of people. And one thing that I'm just utterly convinced by, and that is the way forward for us as a country, for America, is for multicultural people, multicultural family members, multicultural people who are part of a family unit. Whether you yourself individually are multicultural or interracial, or your child is in a multicultural or interracial relationship, or your cousins, it is an opportunity for us, not just an opportunity, it is a responsibility for multicultural people to call balls and strikes on race. We have to do it. We have to do it because we are uniquely qualified to do it. And what happened in Washington this week just made it as clear as day. And it also, what else it made as clear as day was that there are, in my opinion, again, there are forces that are out there whose living is derived by festering and fostering racial dissension. There are. Part of that is the media. Part of that are people who are just racist and wear shirts saying we need to kill 6 million Jews is not enough. There are those entities out there, and they're actively working to cause dissension. They are actively working to categorize every person as an extremist or not as an extremist. And if we as multicultural people don't do our job and take our responsibility and say, listen, you can be Caucasian and be for Donald Trump and not be a racist. If we don't say that and say it over and over again, then we have entire populations in this country who are going to be excluded and relegated to being racist. It literally feeds the death knell of our society, because these groups who, if you're on the left, then you're absolutely against white people. And if you're on the right, then you're absolutely against people of color. And making these predictions or statements, it's counterproductive and it's hurtful. It is hurting our society. It is critically important for us to evolve, for us to grasp the evolution, for us to take it and utilize it in a way that we can make this one of our strengths. The number one reason I'm utterly convinced multiculturalism works is I've lived it. If you are multicultural, if you are not obsessed with someone being white or someone being Asian or someone being Latino, and you're more obsessed with the facts and the truth, it gives you clarity. It gives you clarity. I was watching the Capitol, and it was a riot, and it was an insurrection at some level. But again, I think we have to examine that. I'm watching that, and I'm hearing the media say all these things. These people are just racist. They hate, they're anarchists and all this, and some of them are. But I also saw faces of a bunch of Caucasian people who are scared and worried about society evolving and changing. That is the fact. The simple truth of the matter is when I looked into those groups, I see people who are afraid. I see people who are contemplating and understanding change, and that change takes them from the level of white privilege, which is a simple fact. There's no dispute that white privilege exists. But the fact of the matter is these people are being moved from that understanding, and it scares them. We're allowing the media and other people to attack people who are just scared of their position in life changing. We're allowing people to call them racist and bad people and shitty people. That's not correct. It's not correct. The loss of white privilege is something that we as a society, we have to address honestly and succinctly if we're going to make things work. And it was ironic that, and this is how God is, again, sometimes God works in very direct ways. In the same geographic location, roughly Lafayette Park, we had protesters in this country protesting, and it wasn't Black Lives Matter. And again, that is misleading. It was people saying that police violence is wrong. Black Lives Matter is a part of police violence, but the real issue was people coming together saying police violence is not acceptable. It's change. 10 years ago, that would never have happened. It was systemic change based upon African Americans, Latinos, and Caucasians coming together, and Asians, and saying, we are uncomfortable with police violence. One of the reasons that movement is meaningful and telling is because it's multicultural in scope. It's people understanding. It's with people activists out there getting Caucasians to understand and empathize with people of color about police violence. Joe Rogan, who I love, and I think he's great. He's kind of like the test for white people, as far as I'm concerned, reasonable white people. I watch his show, and he consistently misses police violence. He views police violence as something he just doesn't understand, and he doesn't. He doesn't. He thinks that reforming the police isn't a good idea and doesn't understand the demand for it. It's because he doesn't know what police violence is. If you're a person of color, you know well what police violence is. You look at police violence and you say, that has to be fixed. Caucasians who live an entirely different existence cannot look at that premise and understand it. For them to understand police violence and what it means to multicultural people, to people of color, for Caucasians to understand that requires empathy. It requires a willingness to hear someone else's point of view. And one thing that has happened is that empathy and that understanding is reaching further and further out from communities of color, and Caucasians are beginning to say, this is a real problem. And it was weird. And the George Floyd thing, there's a lot of things that happened, but I think the key was when he was asking his mother to help him. That was a premise that every person, irrespective of race or gender, could understand. That moment created empathy within the majority community, and that gave us the opportunity to grow. The same has to be true for the loss of white privilege. We know white privilege exists. In this weekend, we saw the quintessential example of white privilege. Caucasian protesters, rioters were treated with kid gloves. It was stunning as a person of color or as a person who has fought police violence to see. That was white privilege. We have to acknowledge, Caucasians have to acknowledge that exists. African Americans, Latinos, people of color, we have to acknowledge that differentiation exists. Simultaneously, though, if we have to recognize that white privilege exists, and in order to recognize that as an element of change, a necessary element of change, we also have to recognize that white privilege is slipping away from Caucasians. It is. It's demographically true. If we as a community, as a broader community, do not recognize the phenomena of white privilege dissipating, then we won't have empathy for Caucasians. Just Caucasians don't have empathy for people of color and for people who wanted to end police violence. If we don't have that empathy, that understanding, if we ignore the facts, we can't fix it. We can't fix it. It doesn't exist. And for me, it was so funny to watch we have in the last 6 months, we've had perfect examples of perceptions of treatment at one standard for white people or Caucasians, another standard for people of color in the same park, in the same location, in the same country, all of us saying the same thing, which is we recognize this white privilege and we're worried about it. Most of us saying we recognize police violence and we need to do something about it. And where I'm at now, and what I'm saying now is that we as multicultural people, we as a multicultural community, our job is to call balls and strikes on race. And the truth of the matter is this: it's scary for Caucasians to go from I'm winning everything, I get the benefit of everything, to understanding that is coming to an end. It's the truth. We need to talk to Caucasians about that. We need to say, I hear you. It's weird, I know, but we'll get through it. We can make it. We adjust all the time. Multicultural people, we are uniquely qualified to have this discussion. Because once we have that discussion about white privilege and about police violence, we acknowledge that both are 100% real. They're real. But society evolves or it dies. if we acknowledge the reality of white privilege, the reality that demographically white privilege is coming to an end. It's one of the reasons, by the way, you see lower socioeconomic Caucasians, the vast majority of whom are formulating this movement, because for them, it's changing even more. If you're a rich white dude, your white privilege is based upon being rich. But if you look down the economic ladder, white privilege is your one way of distinguishing yourself, of knowing that you have the ability to provide for your family. If you are poorer and less educated, that ability becomes really obvious, that inability to continue it. People are afraid. We have to say to people who are Caucasian, we acknowledge it, we understand it. Demographically, politically, Caucasians, it's a number, it's a fact, it's science. You're losing. And I think in 5 years, Caucasians were the first time to be a minority in the country. I know that's a good thing, but I also know that that's troubling for people. You can't put someone in a boat and say, you get a ride in this boat, you get a ride in this boat, and then they fall out of the boat and you go, wow. And the people in the water going, what's happening here? How am I in this water? I don't understand this. This is uncomfortable for me. Everyone would say that makes sense, that this is uncomfortable for them. But you have to acknowledge that. And that's what the demographic changes that are existing today are there. And if we address them, if we have empathy, if we understand why they feel a certain way, and they understand why we feel a certain way, then we have knowledge, we have strength. That's the whole point of multiculturalism. One of the things we have strengths about is that we get it. We understand, we have a clear understanding of what matters. It also gives us a pathway forward. And it's important. We touched on this a little last week, and we're going to do more on this, but there's a saying, and I remember it. I read this like 20 years ago. Fucking Confucius. Confucius was amazing. He has a saying, he says, the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. Confucius was alive at a time in Asia. Tremendous numbers of people have always existed. And so cultural control, societal control has always been important. And part of that in Confucius's time is you have to properly name things. What does that mean? It means that because a Caucasian likes Donald Trump does not make him or her a racist. It means that because an African American is part of a group, it does not make them a member of Antifa. You have to honestly and accurately describe things so that you can address them and fix them. Now, I have a less compelling way to say it. I call it the hole in the boat theory. That if you're in a boat, you got a bunch of Trump people on the boat and a bunch of liberal left people and all the rest of us in the middle, and you look down and there's like a 2-inch wide diameter of water just flowing into the boat, and there's a little teeny crack to the left of it, and we're all watching it, and we're all in the same boat. This boat is, water's coming into this boat, and the Trump people say, there it is. There's a teeny crack in that, and that's what we caused. But by God, look at this gigantic shooting thing of water. The left caused that. And then the left looks at it and goes, oh my God, look at this. And again, we're all in the same boat. And the left looks at it and says, oh, no, this is that crack. We caused that crack. But that big gushing, gashing flow of water that's filling up the whole boat, yeah, that Donald Trump and his people caused that. And they're going back and forth and back and forth. And here's what multicultural people do. We look at it and go, there's a gigantic hole in this fucking boat and it's gushing water in here and we're all getting ready to sink. So we could address the hole in the boat, properly name the hole in the boat, or we can sink. And then when we sink, guess what? We're all unified in the fucking ocean. This is where we're at. Multicultural people, what we as multicultural people have an obligation to do is to say, my Caucasian friends, I hear what you're saying. My friends on the left who are against Trump and all of these other people, I hear what you're saying. But we all need to put up something in that fucking hole in the boat, or we're all going to drown. Everything goes with it. Our children, our future, our kids, our dogs, our friends, everything. Now, the Trump extremists over here, they can say what they want, and the left extremists over here, they can say what they want, but the people in the middle are the ones that count if we hold them accountable. And holding them accountable begins with multicultural people saying, enough is enough. Enough is enough. You people, all of you are wrong. You're wrong. We need to stop it. We had in the United States of America people being killed in the U.S. Capitol, and there are still recriminations on both sides. Here's the truth: it's our capital. It's all of our capital. And in the last 6 months, democracy at its most beautiful, people protesting were there, and we were doing things. And then we had another protest that was then, it got ugly, but it got ugly because of extremists. It didn't get ugly because of whole groups of people. It got ugly because of extremists. We have to call balls and strikes as multicultural people. If we don't do it, our boat's going to sink. Our boat is going to sink. If you are a Caucasian dude and you have an interracial child or an interracial grandfather, you have an obligation to say to Caucasians who are saying stupid things, you could say that's not true. You're not hearing this properly. I can give you insight on this. If you're a Latino and you hear, and you have a half Caucasian granddaughter, and you hear Latino people saying, then you can say that's not true. That's not accurate. I hear what you're saying, but that's not accurate. But we have to say it. Think about it. We are the idea that in America today, in 2021, we've had 5 people killed in the U.S. Capitol, and it still hasn't effectuated change. It tells you that the crazy people on the right side of the boat and the crazy people on the left side of the boat, they're helping the boat to sink. But you know who really is at cause for the boat sinking? Us, the regular people. The important thing about honestly assessing what's going on is that if we don't do that, then we can't ever fix it. You can't fix it. You can't fix the hole in the boat if you ignore there's a hole in the boat. And I understand it's difficult. And I understand for some of us, it may, if you are Caucasian, I understand it may be difficult for you to say, it bothers me that I'm going to lose my white privilege. I understand that. But that doesn't mean that we can't say it. It doesn't mean that you can't say it. It doesn't mean that we can't fix it. Because here's the craziest thing about it. What's amazing about multiculturalism. If you are Caucasian and we all are working together, we don't have to worry about what slice of the pie you get. We'll just make the pie bigger. And it works. It works. It makes us all better. It gives everything better. It's the back to the hole in the boat premise. If you are Caucasian or if you are on the right, and if you're on the left saying you don't care about police violence, and you're on the right saying you don't care about the loss of white privilege, here's what I guarantee you. If all of us say, well, let's do this, let's go ahead and fix the hole in the boat, and we'll fix that. And if we all just start then shoveling water and shit out of the boat, that boat rises, and we all are on that boat that's rising, and there's more places. We can take the boat anywhere. We can take it to McDonald's. We can take it wherever we want. There's plenty for all of us. There's plenty for all of us. And we could do that together. And we can do that for all of us. But here's the truth. It's coming anyway. That's the part of this that people have to understand. Demographic change happens. Societal change happens. It's coming. Let's do it together. Let's look at this and say, hey, that's cool. I mean, it's It's back to my premise. Another one of my worldly premises. The problem with racial stereotypes, they're so damn accurate. We can joke and laugh at race. We can joke at our differences. We can take it and we can use them all for all of us. It works. But it starts with being uncomfortable a little bit. It starts with acknowledging other things. It starts with saying, yeah, I've had an advantage. That's okay. That's okay. That's good. I have a personal example of this. As you guys may know, I think pedophilia is just horrible. And I mean that in a broader sense. I am utterly convinced that pedophilia in America and across the world is allowed because there are more pedophiles than anyone wants to acknowledge. And it has to be that. It has to be, because if we were against pedophilia, we could stop it. And so I've researched and looked, and my other topic is serial killers, so that you may not want to be alone with me, frankly. But and I love serial killers because it's that mentality. What is causing this? And there's a program that was on, and it was talking about giving pedophiles treatment. And I said, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. That is outrageous. We should not give pedophiles treatment. And then I heard one of the guys talking, and he said, here's the story. I have 2 children. I've never molested a child in my life, but the constant need that I have to do so scares me. And he says, if I don't get treatment, I'm going to molest a child. So if you care about children and you care about stopping pedophiles, getting me treatment helps. And I was sitting there, and it was one of these moments where literally 12 minutes before, I thought that was the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. And then I heard it, and I stepped back and said, it's exactly correct. We have to evolve. We have to come up with ways to change. I'm not equating Trump people or Antifa or anyone with pedophiles. I'm just saying that there are intractable positions that we all may believe we have, but learning about that position or learning why a person feels that way can help in the process of fixing it. And that's what we need to do. The proper naming of things is also important because it really allows us to explore differences together, but it also stops. There's what's called negative externality. An externality is shit that happens that you had no idea was going to happen. And thus a negative externality is a negative event occurs that you did not know was going to occur. And part of that, these negative externalities comes from, or I believe is caused by the failure to properly name things. Again, it's back to it's like with Brad Hughes last week, my good friend. If we are literally, if the one prong test for being racist isn't your whole life up to that point, but it's you identifying with a Caucasian candidate because you're Caucasian, if that's the standard, and if you do that, then you are pushed into this group of extremists. That means that those who aren't racist and have nothing racial in any way, shape, or form are literally being moved from the middle of the boat with all of us over to that side. And it's the same thing here. If a person, as Brad said, that he had people saying to him, if you're against Trump, dump me. And so we're pushing these extremists to the either side. And if we do that, we literally lose any ability to understand. We lose any ability to evolve in a spasmodic way. Change is going to happen. It's going to happen. Change is a alleviating of stress, of pressure. Society is a dynamic process. If we don't change, then that dynamic process explodes. It exploded this week. Now, and again, those people are going to go to prison, and lots of them are. What's unfortunate, I think about 80% of those people were just along for the ride, and they got caught up in something stupid. But the fact of the matter is, societal change has routinely exploded in this country. Malcolm X had the greatest line. He said, if you be nice and all this, but they put hands on you, send them to the morgue. You look at violent events, and violent events, so many of which the predicate was someone overreaching, someone saying, that's it, I'm not going to tolerate it. If we don't reach out to people, if we don't have empathy, if we don't use our collective wisdom, some understanding and empathy, things explode. We don't need things to explode. I mean, we're right here. And all we have to do is be responsible, evolve in our minds, evolve. It's pretty fucking simple. It's literally, if we evolve, we survive. If we don't, we don't. And it's funny that I was thinking about this over the weekend and what I was going to say. And then I was talking to a friend of mine last night. And this is the perfect example of what happens when you fail to properly name things. My friend Travis Williams he's captain of the Kansas City, Missouri Fire Academy. And Travis is telling me about that he had to take a deposition. And a deposition is where you lawyers on this side, lawyers on the other side, and ask questions. And Travis, who just is a straightforward, who, by the way, properly names shit, was asked about a Caucasian dude saying to an African-American friend, "What's up, nigger?" Like that. Now, if you're over 30, that might bother you, but under 30, that's kind of a standard way that stupid people or young people talk. It's not, and in this context, the African-American kid who the guy said the N-word to was like, I didn't think anything about it. He's one of my best friends. It's cool. We're still friends. Travis was deposed, and the lawyer asked him, well, what do you think about that? And Travis says, which is accurate, he says, well, I don't know. Here's what I do know. I think they're both stupid, but there's one definition from the Urban Dictionary and one from another dictionary. In the Urban Dictionary, it says that it's a term of endearment. And I read the article last night because I didn't believe it. The Kansas City Star calls him a racist, calls him all these horrible things, attributes every horrible thing in the world to Travis Williams because he specifically addressed the evolving social perception of the N-word. And he's a racist. And he's involved with racism because he didn't step in and do something that the African-American person who heard it had no concern with. Again, it is the media elite telling us what racism is or is not. It's that paternalism that just smells of discrimination, not by Travis, but by the media and by the reporters who are saying, oh, you should have done something. It's that failure to properly name things that is so dangerous. Dangerous. The truth of the matter is this. If you want to address not enough African Americans, not enough Latinos, not enough women in the fire department, guess what? You know the main place that gets addressed at? The Fire Academy. Travis Williams being at the Fire Academy is the best hope that communities of color have for promoting or making sure people of color and women are given a fair shot. But because we aren't properly naming things, we let stupidity reign the day. And what's great about this is it is one of these scenarios where and I mean this sincerely, if you would have called me and said, is Travis Williams a racist? As God is my witness, I would have said, absolutely. He's the most racist, horrible person in the world. He is a racist because it's the dumbest shit you've ever heard. But instead of looking at someone at what they're saying, instead of hearing what they're talking about, you have the media portrayed in a way by taking one word because the media says that's racist. Well, you know what the media doesn't know is if you have any people of color in your life, if you've talked to kids under 30, what Travis said is exactly what exists today in the world. The terminology has evolved. It is changing. But instead of grabbing that and thinking and saying, this is how we have to view things, instead of saying, yes, it evolves. Travis is a 40-year-old white dude, and he evolves. He goes, listen, let me tell you something. There's this evolving thing. Travis is, I mean, we were laughing yesterday, and it really is literally, legitimately, his best friends are black, African American. I mean, it just is insulting when you have to spend 1 second saying, no, my best friend is this or that, as opposed to people actually properly naming things. It is dangerous. Where if you are a young person of color and you want to be a fire person, you are so much better off with someone like Travis, who's not afraid to address racial issues that actually exist. You're so much better off with that person being in the position of authority and control than someone who says, oh, the N-word never happened, it's always offensive. Really? What happens if an African American says it? Is that offensive? Oh, then it's not discrimination. Oh, so we have a double standard for young men of color. The fact of the matter is things change. And by failing to properly name things, by failing to obtain wisdom, we head down a path that is ugly. I love Travis. Travis is great, but the fact of this is just a factual issue. That person is the best person there can be for people of color at the academy. He's the best person for there can be for Caucasians at the academy who do not want to be part of racism. He's the best person because he looks at it and sees it and hears it. And what happens? He gets trashed in the paper. And by the way, one thing the Kansas City Star did is they said that fire department has paid $2.5 million in settlements and legal fees. 2.5 million or 4.5 million. The Kansas City Police Department has paid 20 million, 10 times that number in police brutality suits. They paid me 600,000. Then they paid me another 400,000. They've paid millions. And yet the Star is tagging Travis Williams as being part of this vicious racist cycle that has produced a figure in damages that is a mere fraction of what the police department has paid. There are agendas being had. There are agendas being played out. We as multicultural people have an obligation to say, that's not true. That's not true. Those Caucasians who did what they did this week, yes, there were horrendous racists among them. But the vast majority of them, in my opinion, from what I saw, just people desperate, scared, and hurt. Just as in Lafayette Park, when people were absolutely correctly protesting police violence. Those weren't people who are angry and mad. Those are people who are angry and hurt about endemic discrimination. And they wanted something to change. And because there's empathy and Caucasians are beginning to understand the premise of police violence, things are changing. If we begin, as people of color, begin to empathize and look at the hole in the boat with the people in the boat with us, which is Caucasians who are losing their white privilege. And instead of attacking that, that's a good thing, but having some empathy for where they are, we could fix this shit. This is simple if we have the proper naming of things. If we have the right people deciding whether or not a stupid kid saying the N-word constitutes a racist act, that the way you resolve that is with someone who knows what they're talking about. Multicultural people, we know what we're talking about, and we have an obligation to do that. And that's our show for today. It's a good show. But again, do not misunderstand. Our presidential pardons are running out. We need 34 more to be 1,000. This is a Mark Samuel production, and in conjunction with the Laugh Bureau. Again, Multicultural Club members. Hey, Travis. All right. Thank you.
The Fletch Cast. It's genetics.